That spot, it hurts. That spot, it hurts. Her voice cracked in the heat, thin as a dry reed, and it carried farther than she meant it to. Lily Mercer tried to swallow, but her throat had turned to dust. The sun stood straight overhead, white and merciless, pressing down on the Kansas grass until the land itself seemed to hold its breath. She lay stretched on the hard ground near the river flats, wrists bound, ankles pulled apart, her dress torn and dusted with straw. Every muscle in her body trembled, not just from pain, but from shame that burned deeper than the rope biting her skin. She tried to turn her head away, but there was nowhere to look that didn't remind her she was being watched, judged, and left there to break. A circle of women stood back from her, far enough to keep their skirts clean, close enough to make sure she knew she wasn't alone. Their faces were tight, lips thin, eyes hard, like this had been decided long before she ever spoke her first word in town. She swallowed, her throat raw, her mouth dry, and when the pain spiked again, sharp and deep, the words slipped out before she could stop them. It still hurts. It wasn't just the rope. It wasn't just the sun. It was the knowing. The knowing that no one was coming. The knowing that this was meant to teach her something, to grind her down until she learned her place, or left, or didn't get back up at all. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried to remember why she'd come west in the first place. She had come west for work and a clean start, and now she couldn't even lift her own hands. Instead, here she was, tied out on the edge of Dodge City land, treated like a warning sign nailed into the dirt. One of the women shifted her weight, boots scuffing dry grass. Another crossed her arms, muttering about decency and lessons that had to be taught. Lily didn't answer. She didn't beg. Begging had already been taken from her. The heat crawled over her skin, slow and heavy, and every minute felt longer than the last. She thought of her mother back east, of cool water, of clean sheets, of a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. Then she heard the horse. At first it was only a rhythm, distant and uneven, hooves striking dry ground. One of the women glanced toward the sound, her jaw tightening. Another hissed for quiet. The horse came closer anyway. Dust lifted on the breeze, and a shadow stretched across the field, long and unmistakable. A man reined in a few steps away. He didn't speak right off. He just looked. Caleb Hart swung down from the saddle, slow and careful, like a man walking into a room where every word mattered. He was broad-shouldered, sun-worn, with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too many summers like this one. His gaze went first to the ropes, then to Lily's face, then to the women standing back, pretending this was none of their business. He knelt beside Lily, close enough for her to smell leather and dust, close enough to feel a flicker of shade cross her skin. She opened her eyes and met his. There was no pity in them. There was something heavier, something like anger held on a tight rein. She tried to shift again, and the pain flared, hot and sudden, stealing her breath. Her voice came out rough, almost broken. That spot, it hurts. Caleb followed her words with his eyes, quiet and steady, like a man trying not to jump to the worst thought in his mind. He reached for his belt. The women stirred. One of them took a step forward, her voice sharp, telling him to stay out of it, telling him this was women's business. Caleb didn't look up. He drew his knife. The steel flashed once in the sun. A breath passed, then another. The rope gave way under his hand. It snapped loose, rough fibers falling apart like they'd been waiting for it. Lily gasped as the tension released, pain washing through her in a rush that made her shake. Before anyone could stop him, Caleb shrugged out of his coat and laid it over her, firm and careful like it was the most natural thing in the world. He lifted her then, not gentle, not rough, certain. The women started shouting, voices colliding, calling him a fool, a traitor, a man who didn't understand what kind of girl this was. In the commotion, a white handkerchief slipped from someone's sleeve and fluttered into the dust near Caleb's boot. He didn't say a word about it. He just saw the stitched V and he remembered it. Caleb turned, Lily cradled against him, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was low, steady, and it carried, "This is done." All of it. He mounted his horse with her in his arms. But instead of turning away from town, instead of riding for the open range, Caleb kicked his heels and aimed straight for the road that led back to Dodge City. That was the moment everything changed. People came out of doorways. Hands froze halfway through work. Conversations died as they saw who he carried and where he was headed. Caleb reined in near the church, right where no one could look away. He dismounted, set Lily down in the shade, and stood over her, silent and unyielding. Dust settled. No one spoke. The whole street went still, like Dodge City had forgotten how to breathe. What was meant to be hidden had been dragged into the open. The first person to move was a little boy with a slingshot who stopped mid-step like he'd just walked into a funeral. A woman behind him grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back, not gentle, not cruel, just scared of being seen caring. A man in a sweat-stained hat took off his hat anyway, then put it back on when he realized nobody else did. Caleb watched those small decisions, and he knew that was how a town decided its soul. Vivian's shop door creaked across the street. She didn't come out. She didn't need to. Her shadow sat in that doorway like a judge who never had to show her face. The sheriff cleared his throat again, louder this time, like noise could erase what people had already seen. Caleb turned his head just enough to catch the sheriff's eyes. The man looked away fast, and that told Caleb there was a chain somewhere, and it didn't start with Lily. Mrs. Hale's wagon wasn't here yet. Lily lay under Caleb's coat, breathing shallow, eyes open, staring at the church steps like she was trying to memorize who stayed silent. Caleb leaned down, not close enough to crowd her, just close enough to be heard. He told her she did one thing right. She came back into town. He told her that took more grit than most folks in Dodge City had in their whole body. Lily blinked once, and the tiniest sound left her throat. Not a word, more like a promise. Caleb stood again, and he felt the street waiting to see if he'd flinch. He didn't. If you want more stories like this told slow and honest, subscribe to the channel. Pour a cup of tea. Settle in and tell me what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. Because what Caleb saw stitched on that cloth was only the first crack in a much bigger lie. As Lily lay there wrapped in a stranger's coat, the town staring back at itself for the first time, one question hung in the hot summer air. When a whole town believes a lie and one man chooses to break it open, who's really going to pay the price in the end? The town didn't rush in to help once Lily was laid down in the shade. That was the first thing she noticed. People stared. They whispered, but no one stepped forward. Caleb stood between her and the street, boots planted, hands loose at his sides, like a fence that wasn't going to move. The preacher hovered near the church door, unsure whether this was his place or not. A shopkeeper leaned against his post, eyes narrowed, already thinking about which side would cost him less in the long run. Lily watched all of it through a haze, the pain easing just enough to let the weight of what had happened settle in her chest. She had been dragged out of town in the morning. Now she was back before noon, and somehow it felt worse. Caleb crouched beside her, voice low, telling her to stay still, telling her help was coming. He sent a boy running toward Fort Dodge to fetch Mrs. Nora Hale, the widow who knew more about tending wounds than most riders. As the boy ran, Lily closed her eyes, and the noise of the street faded into memory. She hadn't been in Dodge City a week when it started. By the end of that first week, she could feel the town watching her like a hand on the back of her neck. A fresh face always drew looks. A young woman alone drew more. She had taken work where she could, washing dishes at the boarding house near the Santa Fe Trail, sleeping in a narrow room with a window that rattled in the night. Men talked. She kept her head down. Then there was Ezra. It started the way trouble usually starts, quiet and friendly like it's doing you a favor. Ezra offered to carry a bucket, offered to fix a loose hinge, offered to stand too close while he talked. Lily kept her hands busy and her answers short, because she'd learned back east that politeness could be mistaken for permission. One evening, she walked past the desk at the boarding house and saw an envelope with a red wax seal, fresh enough to smell faintly sweet. It didn't belong with rent receipts and laundry lists. It looked official, like it wanted to pretend it had weight. Before she could think, she saw Vivian Crow at the end of the hall, not speaking, just watching Lily's eyes. Vivian's smile was small, almost kind, but it didn't reach her face. Lily looked away, and her stomach tightened because she understood something without proof. Someone had noticed. The next day, Ezra cornered her by the stable again, voice low, acting like he was the one at risk. Lily stepped back, and her heel hit a loose board. The board shifted, and for a split second she saw more envelopes tucked under hay, all marked the same way. She did not touch them, she did not ask. She just walked away steady, like her heart wasn't pounding. That night, she found Martha Phelps outside the wash line, staring at the ground like it might open and swallow her. Martha didn't speak, but her eyes begged Lily to leave town before the town decided to take something else. Clear, firm, that should have been the end of it. Instead, the looks changed. Women stopped meeting her eyes. Conversations cut short when she entered a room. By the time Vivian Crow spoke her name out loud, the verdict was already decided. Vivian didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She stood straight, dressed neat, speaking of morals and respect, saying things like, "We must protect our homes." She said Lily had been seen near Ezra. She said a good woman wouldn't put herself in that position. And just like that, Lily became a lesson. Back on the street, Caleb watched the faces around him, recognizing something he'd seen before: relief. Not because Lily was safe, but because the mess was now out in the open, where it could be explained away, reshaped, forgotten. The sheriff arrived late. He cleared his throat, adjusted his belt, asked what all the fuss was about. Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at the man, really looked, and saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward Vivian's shop. Dead had a smell. Caleb had learned that years ago. Mrs. Hale arrived with a basket and a look that could cut through steel. She knelt beside Lily, checked her wrist, murmured soft instructions, clucked her tongue at the heat. Caleb stepped back enough to give them room, but not far enough to lose control of the space. Mrs. Hale finished tending Lily and told Caleb she needed rest, shade and time. Time was the one thing Dodge City never wanted to give. The sheriff shifted again, said maybe everyone should head home, said this had all gone far enough. Caleb finally spoke. He said it had gone far enough when a woman was tied out in the sun. He said if anyone had something to say about Lily, they could say it to him. No one did. People drifted away one by one, the way folks do when they hope a problem will solve itself. Vivian stood in her doorway and watched, expression calm, hands folded like she'd just finished a chore. Beside her stood Martha Phelps, Ezra's wife, pale as flour, eyes fixed on the ground. She looked like she wanted to speak, but didn't know how to do it without getting crushed. Lily caught her eye from the ground. For a moment, there was nothing polite left in Vivian's face, just calculation. Mrs. Hale helped Lily onto a wagon and headed toward her place near Fort Dodge. Caleb walked beside them until the town fell behind. Before he turned back, Lily reached for his sleeve. Her grip was weak but certain. She told him she hadn't done what they said. She told him she had seen something she wasn't meant to see, papers, seals, men meeting after dark. She told him she thought that was why this had happened. Caleb nodded. He believed her. Not because she was young, not because she was hurt, because lies had a way of announcing themselves. And this story rang clean. As he rode back toward town alone, the weight of old memories settled in. He had seen this before. Different faces, same rules. A group deciding who deserved protection and who didn't. Back in Dodge City, the sun slid lower, shadows stretching long across the street. Vivian's shop lights flickered on. The sheriff sat at his desk, staring at papers he didn't want to read. And somewhere between them, a line had been crossed. Most folks figured the danger had passed. Caleb knew the night was just getting started. By the time Caleb rode back into Dodge City, the street had settled into that uneasy quiet that comes before trouble decides what shape it wants to take. The wagons were parked. The saloon doors hung still. Men pretended to be busy, but their eyes followed him all the same. He felt it in his shoulders, the way a town can turn its weight against one man without ever saying a word. Caleb tied his horse and stepped inside the saloon, not because he wanted a drink, but because that was where the truth usually leaked out first. The air smelled of whiskey and dust. A card game paused. Someone coughed. Nobody welcomed him. He ordered water. That alone earned a few looks. A ranch hand near the bar muttered something about decent women. Caleb ignored it. He'd learned a long time ago that answering every insult only made the noise louder. Instead, he listened. Talk always circled the same way. Lily brought it on herself. Vivian was only doing what had to be done. The town couldn't afford trouble like that. Caleb turned on his stool and finally spoke, calm and even. He asked who exactly had seen Lily do anything wrong. No one answered him straight. They glanced at each other, shrugged, took sips, said things like, "Everybody knows," or "I heard." That told him enough. A man bumped his shoulder on purpose as he passed. Caleb didn't move. The man tried again. This time Caleb stood, chairs scraped back. Someone laughed too loud. It didn't turn into a full fight, not yet. But a shove landed, and then a punch followed, quick and sloppy. Caleb took it, stepped in close, and put the man down with one solid swing. No flourish, no show, just enough to remind the room he wasn't an easy target. The bartender barked for calm. The sheriff appeared in the doorway like he'd been waiting for the right moment. He told Caleb to cool it. Caleb told him he'd be happy too, once the town stopped tying women out in the sun. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He said it wasn't that simple. Caleb knew what that meant: debt, pressure, fear of standing alone. Outside, the afternoon dragged on heavy and slow. Caleb walked past the dry goods store, past Vivian's shop. She stood inside measuring cloth, smiling at a customer. Perfect. Untouchable. He kept walking. He stopped by the boarding house near the Santa Fe Trail, the place Lily had stayed. The owner hesitated, then led him into the narrow room. Nothing fancy: a bed, a wash basin, a small table. But on that table sat an envelope, empty now, the edge marked with a faint red stain: wax. A seal like that didn't belong in a boarding house. It belonged in offices where land quietly vanished. Caleb leaned closer. The mark wasn't random. It was pressed clean, deliberate, a stamped mark, the same kind he'd seen years ago on papers that weren't meant to hold up under daylight. As he straightened, a man stepped into the doorway behind him, not a local. His coat was too clean, his boots worn in a way that spoke of miles, not mud. He asked Caleb if Lily had mentioned anything else. Caleb didn't answer right away. He studied the man's face. There was no threat in it, just patience. The man said he was passing through, said he'd been following some bad paper along the rail line. Said Dodge City kept coming up more than it should. Caleb nodded. That was all. The sun dipped lower, heat easing, but tension rising. Caleb rode out to Mrs. Hale's place near Fort Dodge. Lily was resting, color back in her face, though her eyes stayed sharp. She told him more about a meeting late one night, men arguing in low voices, a woman's silhouette standing apart, giving orders without raising her voice. She didn't know names. She didn't need to. Caleb did. As he rode back toward town under a sky turning orange and purple, he felt that old familiar pull in his chest, the pull that came when right and easy went separate ways. Dodge City lit its lamps. Vivian's shop glowed warm and inviting. The sheriff locked his office door and poured himself a drink. And somewhere between the river and the rail line, a truth sat waiting, patient as a coiled rope. Caleb knew one thing for sure: the town thought the worst of it was over. They were wrong, because the next move wouldn't be made in daylight.